Keanu Reeves is often seen as the nicest man in Hollywood, and it's not hard to see why. There's countless examples of his good deeds, from the simple things like stopping to have a chat with fans, all the way to massive secret donations to charities that have since been uncovered. Whether you're watching an interview with his fellow stars or you're talking to someone who met him in person, nobody's got anything bad to say about him, which is very rare for most people in Hollywood, striking a hard contrast against the world he's climbed to be at top of. In a sea of fake smiles and assault allegations, Keanu Reeves seems like one of the only normal people left in the industry.
It's a very, very calm energy.
He hit that Johnny Depp, Tom Cruise level of fame and then just became this super chill, mellow guy that can just like go through crowds. That guy sits on the subway by himself.
So how did he manage to do this? What did he go through to make him the person that he is today? And what can we learn from his journey? You see, a lot of celebrities and world-renowned people have had harsh upbringings. Keanu Reeves was no different. Born in Lebanon in 1964, his early life was anything but stable.
My mother and father were like 21, 22. My mother, English, ran away from home, working, showgirl, but then also picking up pins in couture houses, getting into fashion where she would end up becoming a fashion designer.
His father had heavy substance abuse issues, which along with his abusive behavior to Keanu's mother, destroyed their marriage shortly after Keanu was born. When he was just 2 years old, his father abandoned his new family and the pair divorced. So shortly afterwards, Keanu moved with his mother to Australia, but that wouldn't last long either. From there, they bounced around the globe until they finally settled down in Toronto, Canada a few years later. While Keanu's youth would be much more stable, it wasn't easy by any means. His mother married when Keanu was 6 and had more children, with Keanu ending up as the oldest of 4. The absence of his father would have its own presence in his life, but it didn't stop Keanu from doing what he knew he loved. From the age of just 9, Keanu was already attending acting classes and starring in his school's theatre productions. In interviews since then, he's described himself as a private kid, sociable and easy to talk to, but still private and introverted, and it's a quality he seems to have never lost. His involvement in acting lessons and sports were some of the only bright spots he had in an otherwise troubled education. He attended and got kicked out of 3 different schools in 5 years. And there were some good reasons for it. First was his dyslexia, which made the work much harder than it needed to be. Back then, these things weren't nearly as well understood, and it probably turned every lesson into a nightmare. Then there was the fact he simply didn't fit into the system. Teachers found him hard to control, as sitting still just wasn't for him. Instead of putting in the effort to actually understand him, they just moved him on to the next school over and over again. Eventually though, Keanu ended up at an academy for performing arts, where he could finally thrive. Already we're living in a world of constant distractions all around us, but can you imagine how dangerous this could be in situations like driving on the road and the collisions and accidents that result from this? Just recently, a truck driver in Tennessee working for a concrete mix company smashed into the car of a single mother of 4. As the driver attempted to turn left out of a subdivision, distracted, he crashed into her head-on, resulting in around $69,000 in medical expenses, and the pre-trial offer was only $70,000. So what do you even do in these sorts of situations? Traditional personal injury law firms often involve burdensome paperwork, time-consuming processes, and costly appointments, making it difficult for victims to get the justice they deserve. And that's why I want to tell you about Morgan & Morgan. After the incident, Morgan & Morgan worked with the mother of 4 to reach a record-breaking $30 million verdict after highlighting the defendant's misconduct and the severity of the injuries to the jury. When you're seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. Morgan & Morgan don't settle for lowball offers. They achieved significant verdicts in the past couple of months for victims involved in life-altering car crashes. $12 million in Florida, 34 times the highest insurance offer. $26 million in Philadelphia, 40 times the highest insurance offer. And their fee is absolutely free unless you win. And the best part, working with them can all be done from your phone without the need to visit any offices. If you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions, and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's so easy, you can start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan at www.forthepeople.com/moon, link in the description below. While still a teenager, Keanu took nighttime acting classes, the only way he could fit into his busy schedule.
I was probably around 15. I asked my mother, is it okay if I'm an actor? And she was like, whatever you want, darling. So thanks for that, Ma.
With such a big family, there was always work to do at home as well, and there's no doubt that Keanu's early career was helped along by the man whose mother married, as he had a bunch of connections in the industry. There's tons of kids with similar advantages, but only a few are willing to put in the work to really utilize them. But he didn't start as an actor at first. Instead, he would begin as a production assistant when he was just 15 years old, and it didn't take long for Keanu to dive straight in. giving up on his education and dedicating himself fully to show business. And it paid off, but only slowly at first. Keanu took a lot of teen roles, trying to make his breakthrough. There wasn't one standout role, but they all added up over time. It was essential that he learned the ropes, and it wasn't long before he got properly noticed and made his way to Hollywood. But there was still a mountain of work between where he was then and stardom. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Keanu Reeves revealed that he wanted to change his name just a day after he landed in Los Angeles.
Okay, so I'm 20 years old and I'm gonna drive in my first car.
Yes.
And I'm gonna drive to Hollywood. And get there and my manager, my agent say, welcome.
Yeah, this is a great story.
Great to see you. And I'm all excited and they say, great to see you, but we want to change your name.
Assuming that Keanu wasn't Western enough for audiences, they insisted he use his initials at first. It didn't last, of course, but the incident taught him a valuable lesson. Fitting yourself into someone else's plan rarely ever works out. You need to forge your own path instead. His path began with made-for-TV films and other minor roles. First, he started an obscure music video. Then he got some smaller parts in low-budget films. But his true breakthrough came when he incorporated his own experiences into his art. First, there was Youngblood, where he starred as a rookie hockey player. It was one of the first roles to showcase his incredible physical acting abilities. Earlier in life, he had played hockey religiously, and was even aiming at going pro just before a poorly timed injury made him change career paths. It gave his performances a level of authenticity that isn't often seen in young actors. Then there were his performances as troubled teens in films like River's Edge or Under the Influence. Both of the characters he played had similar backgrounds to his own life, dealing with broken families or abusive parents. It meant that he could channel and redirect the waves of emotions that he was dealing with. Despite the relatively low profile of these films, they showed people in the industry that he had what it took to make it. But of course, industry professionals weren't paying enough attention to actually understand the person they were hiring. They only saw the first impression he gave as a thin, quiet Canadian kid. They noticed the results of his hard work, but couldn't see under the surface, so they typecasted him when he finally got his big shot. It was what he made of his first breakthrough role though that led him to further success. By securing the role of Ted in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Keanu was finally getting into the big leagues. And it'd been a massive task. Despite his years of experience and obvious potential, Keanu still had to go through audition after audition, most of which never got him anywhere. Even for the ones he got like Bill and Ted, it was a grueling process. The final stage of the audition reportedly lasted for 7 long hours. Production for the film was also slow. By the end of filming in 1987, the final cut was nearly 2.5 hours long, which had to be cut down significantly. Then the distributor went into bankruptcy just before the film was released, delaying it by another year. It was during this time that everything nearly came to a screeching halt just before it had truly started. Keanu had just recently started riding a motorcycle, a hobby which he's still incredibly passionate about today.
I heard it's motorcycles?
Yeah, right. I have a motorcycle in Hollywood. I don't have a car. I ride a motorcycle, but I'm not really a speed demon or nothing like that.
No?
No. It's a 1974 850 Norton Commando. And, yeah, that's the gig.
But in 1988, a year before Bill and Ted would release, he had an almost fatal accident. Keanu crashed out going 50 miles per hour into a sharp turn, and for the next half an hour he slowly watched his life fade away as other cars just drove past. Finally an ambulance came, but it was almost too late. Keanu would end up losing his spleen in the resulting emergency surgery.
This one I crashed in Topanga Canyon on a demon ride.
Los Angeles?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had...
You're on a motorcycle?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was on a motorcycle. I was in Topanga Canyon. I was going really fast, didn't know the road, and there was a hairpin turn. I hit the mountain. I had trauma, a couple of broken ribs, etc., and went to the hospital, and they took the blood out and then sewed up my spleen.
Sewed up your spleen?
Sewed up my spleen.
Well, see, now that's a mistake, because if your spleen is damaged, it should come out.
Considering he owns a whole motorcycle company today, it clearly didn't scare him away from them, but it would have definitely put Bill and Ted's success into perspective. The film took in more than 4 times its budget when it hit the box office, but the visibility and the recognition that Keanu got was far more important. The next decade would make Keanu's career, cementing him as one of the top Hollywood A-listers.
You can never know what your life is going to be. And so, I don't know, again, I just kind of feel grateful to be here.
But at the same time, his personal life always kept his feet firmly planted on the ground. By 1991, his career was really taking off. The sequel to Bill and Ted had performed well, and this allowed him to land a role in Point Break. Starring as an undercover FBI agent, the action film demanded a lot more of Keanu than his previous roles had, but it also showed how hard he was willing to work and adapt to whatever was demanded of him. Surfing played a massive role in the movie, but having grown up in Canada, he was a complete stranger to the waves. But with the help of an intensive professional course, he seemed like a natural on screen.
Was this something you did before?
No, it wasn't. I had to take it up, which was part of the reasons why I did it.
Was it difficult to do?
Yeah, surfing's very difficult. It involves a lot of elements, physical, and when you get better at it, when the waves get big, you learn a lot more about your courage, and also what it's like to fall. Because when you fall in the ocean, in big waves, not big waves, but even like 3-foot wave, you can smack bottom and just swallow a lot of water.
It also helped make sure audiences and directors didn't see him as a one-note actor, gaining him access to more serious, prestigious roles in the future. 1991 was also around the same time that he struck up a friendship with River Phoenix, the older brother of Joaquin Phoenix. Coming from similar tough backgrounds and at similar points in their career, the pair were kindred spirits. They even starred in a few films together like My Own Private Idaho. Their friendship made their on-screen chemistry that much more real. In contrast to his success on-screen, Keanu never had an easy time of it in his own life. In a year with so many victories, it was overshadowed by a crushing blow. Keanu's younger sister was diagnosed with leukemia in 1991. While she would eventually beat it, the fight would take over 10 years. She would open up about it in an interview years later saying, quote, "Keanu helped me so much through my illness. When the pain got really bad, he would sit with me and hold my hand." It showed that even at his young age, Keanu knew what was truly valuable in life. It goes towards explaining his massive donations to cancer charities later in his life as well, although it could have just been likely anyway that he would do something like this without the personal experience, as a massive chunk of his Matrix paycheck actually went to charity, for example. And while he was both dealing with this and trying to build his career, tragedy struck again in 1994, when River Phoenix would pass away from an overdose, being only 23 years old at the time. It was a loss that hurt Keanu to his core. He still rarely talks about it in interviews and never really goes into details. Once again, this had come at the same time as a high point in his career. His starring role in Speed really put him on the map, earning him tens of millions of dollars as well, but it must have been hard for him to enjoy at the same time. But then as the second half of the 90s came around, these years would be much less successful for Keanu.
Yeah, I mean, you hope that people like the work that you're a part of and that you do. For me, it's even tougher when you have and this hasn't happened a lot, but a couple of times where you have a great, a hope. You go into making a project and you're like, okay, and then it doesn't turn out as well as you hoped, and that's a disaster.
He had a few good roles here and there, but he was often miscast, and nearly all of his films for the next few years were commercial flops. Despite this, he clearly wasn't put off by any of it. Faced with the same problems, other actors would have happily taken creatively bankrupt but well-paying roles. But when the opportunity to star in a sequel to Speed came up, Keanu refused. This had big implications for his career. 20th Century Fox blacklisted him for about a decade afterwards for denying them an opportunity to make easy money. But the project just didn't sit right with him, and that was all that mattered. If Fox had thought they could put the brakes on his career, they were wrong. The Matrix would be all the proof anyone needed that Keanu was back. Tons of other A-listers like Brad Pitt and Will Smith turned down the role of Neo, seeing the film as all too experimental and ambitious. But when it came out, it would be one of the biggest blockbusters in history. It wasn't just the money, it was the cultural impact of the movie. Now, we don't need to tell you how much people love that film, and Keanu's cool and calculated performance was one of the best parts of it. Of course though, as we should have come to expect by now, the highest highs were always accompanied by the lowest lows. Just 3 months after The Matrix came out, Keanu's girlfriend at the time lost their child 8 months into her pregnancy. It was an unspeakably heavy loss, creating an emotional scar that would never heal. Plenty of celebrities have had to deal with tragedies in their life, just like everyone else. Any gossip magazine will show you just how common they really are, but it will also show you how Hollywood's culture of toxicity preys on these losses. Every death or divorce is just more fuel for the never-ending fire. But it's what people take away and learn from their trials that matters. It's how people deal with tragedy that defines who they really are as a person. It's so easy to get sucked up by them and grow bitter as a result. It takes a true artist and a great person to turn that suffering into something else and ignore the world trying to pull them down. Going by that logic, Keanu is the best role model in Hollywood. He's dealt with so much suffering in his life, but if anything, it's only made him kinder, more thoughtful, and more empathetic. After Hollywood had squeezed as many movies as it could out of The Matrix, Keanu's career went into another quiet period. He was nearly always working, but other than a few major films, he mostly appeared in low to mid-budget comedies and dramas. It wasn't like he'd gotten any less popular though. People still loved seeing him in films. It was just that The Matrix and its sequels had set him up for life. He no longer had to prove anything to anyone, or even take any roles that just didn't interest him. When he did appear in an action film or a high-budget movie during the mid to late 2000s, it often backfired as well. Even after a long career in the industry, most of Hollywood still didn't know how to cast him. For a decade, Keanu dipped in and out of the public consciousness. He didn't particularly want the spotlight, he was just trying to make good movies. It was only when John Wick came out in 2014 that he got dragged back onto center stage. It was the perfect storm. Firstly, the film was perfectly suited to him. It gave him back his signature look and kind of chilly, intense character that he excelled at. Then there were the film's strengths. There weren't any of those quick cuts directors used to make it so you can't tell what's going on. You could see the stunts and athleticism in long uninterrupted shots.
They're like ballets. They're choreographed ballets.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it takes all of that kind of, I think they have things in common, right? So there's a vision for the fight. And through that is also the story of the fight and the story of the characters in that. And I think that's what the director, Chad Stahelski, really brings to it, is that consideration that the fighting has to be part of the story for the characters and even for the kind of the creation of the world.
It threw away lots of the dumb tropes that had plagued action movies for years. It was also much more realistic as well. It was still an action movie, but Keanu's character was clearly vulnerable and human. The end product looked more like a Jackie Chan film than a Fast and Furious movie. Both the film itself and Keanu's performance were things people had clearly missed, and the sequels turned it into a major franchise. But while the John Wick films might have been the trigger for Keanu's resurgence in pop culture, they weren't the real reason he stayed there. Instead, it was the internet that really made him as popular as he is today.
Phenomenon, where people are taking a photo of you sitting on a bench eating a sandwich, looking a little bit sad, and it became like this crazy thing on the internet. I mean, what do you think about that sort of media attention?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think of that as media attention. It was funny.
That so many people were worried about your welfare?
No, I think that's lovely. But no, I think it was, people started to do funny things with that. Sad Keanu.
Before social media, YouTube and the rest, the only things people got to see of celebrities were their scripted appearances and interviews. You could get a basic idea about the person behind it all, but you could never really know who they were outside of that. But the internet would change all of this because it gave a voice to everyone else outside of the industry. For a lot of celebrities, it pretty much ruined their careers. However well they played the nice guy in front of the cameras, the truth about how they acted the rest of the time eventually came out. Celebrities like James Corden, who talked down to people for years without any real consequences, got outed and completely lost their polished reputations. It also worked the other way. People could always tell Keanu was a nice guy. People who met him in person never had anything bad to say about him.
I mean, everything, all the good things you hear about Keanu,
they're
true.
They're actually
true.
Yeah. But he is so immediately, clearly humble, kind, gracious
100%.
that it's just like, oh my gosh, Keanu.
Keanu Reeves must be one of the nicest, coolest people on the planet, because no one has a bad word to say about that guy, ever. He might be what we should all aspire to be. We should all aspire to be Keanu Reeves.
Of course, lots of people had already seen pictures of him just chilling with random strangers and homeless people, but the internet combined all of these stories and spread them around. All those acts of kindness over the decades had built up, and that's why today there's just so many examples that you can't even count them anymore. But on top of being kind, it showed people that Keanu was possibly one of the only celebrities who still seemed like a normal guy. When he got spotted riding the New York subway like anyone else would, the story spread to the entire world. It was only strange to see because it contrasted so much with how the rest of Hollywood acts. Most celebrities would have been driven, trying to hide from the public. Keanu was different. Whenever anyone politely came up to him, he had time for them. Small things like helping the sound engineers carry the equipment got seen by millions of people. When Keanu's flight got cancelled one time, he went with the rest of the stranded passengers on a road trip instead, talking to them all for the whole journey. Other celebrities wouldn't even go on a commercial plane. They wouldn't even think about it. And even if they did, they would have just chartered their own private jet over instead. In interviews as well, he always comes off as a humble and down-to-earth person. He's very rarely shared any details about his personal life, but the ones that did come through only confirmed the picture everyone else had had of him. And this pushed his career into the stratosphere, as people truly couldn't get enough of him. Keanu didn't seek the attention, but sometimes leaned into it. His starring role in the video game Cyberpunk 2077 showed how much people loved him. The launch gave him yet another viral moment, and in the game itself, he's pretty much always there with the second most lines of dialogue in the entire game. It would have been easy to get sick of lots of the other actors, but it still wasn't enough Keanu for most people. It's highly doubtful people will ever get sick of hearing Keanu Reeves in cinemas. He's a breath of fresh air when you compare him to the rest of Hollywood. No other celebrity is so effortlessly humble and down to earth. It shows he's always known what truly matters in life. His career and the way he's carried himself shows us that it's possible to not lose yourself in fame and fortune.